My name's Greg Page. I was the original Yellow Wiggle with the children's group, the Wiggles. I famously survived a sudden cardiac arrest in January 2020, and I've now started up a charity called Heart of the Nation to raise awareness about cardiac arrest and what we call the chain of survival. I always thought of myself as being very fit and healthy. Being part of the Wiggles was a very physically demanding role. It got increasingly harder over the years, though, maybe the older I got, but also when you're away on tour, you don't get to eat the best foods because you don't always have access to them. So as time went on, I put on a bit of weight, ate a little bit more unhealthily probably, but regardless of that, I still exercised, and I thought that the exercise I was doing was enough to combat any of the perhaps negative parts of my lifestyle that I was partaking in. So leading up to January 2020, I'd lost a lot of weight. I was eating more healthily. I was exercising regularly. I was walking 7.5 Ks almost every day. I was playing competition tennis and competition cricket. So I did think of myself as being very fit and healthy. I still had the odd food that wasn't all that good, like pizza or sausages. And then I turned 48 on the 16th of January 2020. The very next day, January 17, that's when the Wiggles did the bushfire concert to raise money for Wires and Red Cross. And that's when I dropped dead. That's when I had a massive heart attack that caused a cardiac arrest. So yeah, that was the point where, you know, perhaps some of those things that I was doing earlier on in my life caught up with me despite all of the good things that I was doing too. So when I collapsed, luckily there were people around who knew what to do. The first person to respond was actually a GP who was in the audience with her daughters. And one of her daughters said, "Mum, Greg's collapsed. You better go check because he's got that heart thing, or, you know, he's got that condition." So Therese came out of the audience and came and checked on me, and she noticed that I was not responding, so she put me in the recovery position. And then they realised that I actually wasn't breathing. And that's the crucial thing. When somebody's not responding, you need to call 000, which they did. When somebody's not breathing, you start CPR. So they started CPR. So together with Therese, there was Kim Antonelli, who was the second on the scene. She helped Therese do CPR. Third on the scene was our drummer, Steve Pace, who'd just done a 1 hour, 20-minute show with the Wiggles. He was first aid trained, and he just came over and started, and he did the bulk of the CPR. And then there was Grace Jones, who was also in the audience that night with her brother, coming along to relive her childhood. And there she was, saving the life of the original Yellow Wiggle. So those 4 people together worked as a team, and they knew what to do. We just need more people in the community that know what to do and are prepared to step up and do it, and that's how we can save more lives. I don't remember a lot about the day that I collapsed. It's funny, they say there's this thing called trauma amnesia, and it's definitely very true. There are things that happened on that day that I had no memory of until somebody would talk about it, and I'd go, "Oh yeah, that's right, I remember." The actual event itself, didn't remember anything about it till I went back and watched the recording of the show. So the show was recorded and I went back and watched it. And when I watched the collapse, I could hear this snoring kind of sound going on. And that snoring sound is what they call agonal or agonal breathing. And that's a sign of somebody who's in cardiac arrest. When I heard that sound, I remembered lying on the ground and feeling that thing going on inside of me. And they were probably what could have been my last breaths before people stepped in and resuscitated me. If there hadn't been an AED there for me as part of my chain of survival, I don't think I would be here. My heart was at the point where it was just about to stop the electrical activity, so it was no longer beating, but the electrical activity was about to stop. And when that happens, that's asystole. That's when you get that flat line that you see on TV shows. When someone's in flat line, the AED no longer works. You're relying upon the ambulance crew to get there and work very hard to try and bring you back with drugs like adrenaline and things. That's why there are so few survivors with cardiac arrest, because that time delay is the biggest factor. Time delay for paramedic crews to arrive, time delay for people to find an AED and use it. If we can shorten that time delay of getting an AED onto people, that's how we will see more survivors. because the chances are when somebody's revived with that AED, they can stay revived, or the AED will keep kicking in until the paramedics can arrive and do what they need to do. Community are the bridge between cardiac arrest and paramedics. And we need that bridge to be strong so that it can support the paramedics when they arrive. So since having my cardiac arrest, I've changed my diet. So I used to love sausages, used to love pizzas, used to love the chicken skin, but no, I don't have those things anymore. I've got to keep my cholesterol down. So I'm on a statin, which is a cholesterol reducing tablet, and that's all I'm on, thankfully. So yeah, just watching my diet, exercising. I must say, running a charity keeps you very, very busy. So I haven't had enough time to exercise. It's something I've got to get back into. Doing all of these preventative things, making sure that you are doing what you can. It's like anything. If you're doing all that you can't do any more. So do what you can while you can, and you'll hopefully have a long and healthy life. So not long after I survived my cardiac arrest, I realised that we do need more people knowing how to do CPR. So I wanted to organise what I wanted to be known as the world's largest CPR class. So we did that in, I think it was September 2020, and we did it as an online live stream event. We had about 24,000 people viewing that. The next year I approached Channel 9 about doing it as a TV special, which they did. It was fantastic. So we had hundreds of thousands of people around Australia knowing how to do CPR. We did it again this year in 2022, and again we've got hundreds of thousands of people around Australia watching this program, learning about cardiac arrest and learning about the chain of survival, which is call, push, shock. And we know that when you've got more people in the community who are able to and prepared to call, push, shock, we can save many, many more lives, because sudden cardiac arrest has a survival rate at the moment of about 10%. So 90% of people do not survive. So when I collapsed, there was a 90% chance I was not going to make it. But for the fact that those people stepped up and did what they did, and they had access to an AED or defibrillator, that is the crucial thing. When you have an AED or defibrillator, within 3 to 5 minutes of somebody who's in cardiac arrest, survival rates can be as high as 70%. Now that's massive, right? Now, defibrillators aren't always going to work in every case of cardiac arrest. But if you've got the chance of 70% versus 10%, we need to make sure there are more AEDs out in the community for people to access rapidly, so that we can increase that survival rate, because 10% is just not good enough. We can do much better than that. I would love to see AEDs within 200 metres of every person in Australia, no matter where you are. That's a big ask, because there's a lot of Australia that's uninhabited, and it's impractical. The main thing is where people live, where they work and where they play, that's where we need to have AEDs, because cardiac arrest can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And when it does, if a responder has rapid access to an AED, that gives that patient the greatest chance of survival. And that's what we want. We want people to be going home to their families like I did. I mean, I left home to go to work, to do something I'd done thousands of times before. And I took it for granted that I'd be home that night. I very nearly wasn't. And for 90% of people that have a cardiac arrest, they don't go home. Their families never see them alive again, and that's the tragedy. We can change it. We can't change it for everyone, but we can make a massive difference. Having AEDs rapidly available in the community will increase survival rates, and more people will get to go home to their families. To use an AED is so simple that even a 5th grade child can do it. They talk you through exactly what to do. As long as you can turn it on, so either find the power button and turn it on, or open up the lid, it will start talking to you. Now, essentially what you need to do is this. You need to have somebody doing CPR for as long as they can whilst you're doing all of this. Get the clothing off the patient. So either remove it with scissors, cut it open. So my yellow skivvy is in tatters now, it's been cut up in the middle. That leaves the chest clear for the pads of the AED to be placed. One pad goes above the right chest or right breast. The other pad goes below the left breast or chest, just slightly to the side. That's because the AED needs to read across the heart, and it needs to send that shock across the heart as well. And that's the best way to do it. On an infant, you'd place one pad on the front and one pad on the back. Again, it's shocking across the heart, so through the heart. Once the pads are on, the AED takes over. So you don't need to make any decisions about what to do. The AED tells you exactly what you need to do, and that is Keep doing CPR until the AED says to stop doing CPR. Stand clear when the AED says to stand clear. If the AED says to press the shock button, that's when you press the shock button. Follow the instructions and you'll potentially save a life. It is very, very simple to do. Leave the pads on the patient, even if they are resuscitated, leave the pads on until the paramedics arrive. Don't take the pads off the patient. So they're so simple to use. And there was a study done between medically trained professionals and 5th grade students who had never seen an AED before. They were just given a device and told to work out how to use it. And the Year 5 students performed just under how well the medically trained professionals performed. That just shows that you don't have to be a medic to be able to save a life. Anyone can do it. If you can listen to instructions and follow instructions, you can use an AED. Even if you're not sure whether you should use it, put the pads on. Because if the patient does go into cardiac arrest, the pads are on straight away. It cuts down that time delay. So yeah, it's so important for people to understand that response to cardiac arrest is simple. I'm not saying that it's easy because it's an emotionally charged situation, but the response is actually a simple thing to do. And the more that we can prepare people to do it, the easier it does become. The more that we try and tell people there are barriers by saying, well, you shouldn't do it unless you're trained, you shouldn't do this, people won't respond, and that's a barrier to survival. We need people to be able to call 000, start CPR, and use that AED as quickly as possible. Ideally, we don't want people dropping dead and having to have the community come in and try to save them. We want to prevent that from happening. I think the general message for people with heart health is everything in moderation. Moderation is the key to life. Don't overindulge on things. Exercise is good, but again, too much of it can also be bad. Bad food, of course, don't have too much of that. Eat healthily, but do everything in moderation. Exercise is so important. It helps to It's actually also a good way of noticing changes. And this didn't happen for me, but somebody I know is a very good cyclist. They were out cycling and they found that their daily ride was getting a little bit harder. They were getting more short of breath on their ride. They went to the GP and they found that there was heart disease going on. So it's those small changes that if you notice you're getting more out of breath than normal going up the stairs at home, go and see a doctor. If you notice any little thing that's different, and that's the big messaging with health, if you notice something that's different, go and find out why it's different, because it could be something that's untoward going on, and that could be the thing that saves your life. It could be the thing that determines whether you need further care or not. On behalf of Heart of the Nation, I just really want to commend National Pharmacies on what they're doing, because making AEDs available to the community is going to make a difference. It is going to save lives. And so having a community leader like National Pharmacies participating in this program and letting the community know that they have what it takes to try and save a life is so important. So if you live near a National Pharmacies, make sure that you find out, or hopefully you'll see the AED in the bright yellow cabinet and you won't miss it, but make sure you know that it's there if you ever need it.